The Toronto Raptors are changing how modern NBA rosters are constructed. I find myself asking this question a lot. What is the next evolution of the NBA? Most recently, it was the three-point revolution that was catalyzed by Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors, and really cemented by the Houston Rockets with their small ball 5-out lineups around James Harden and Chris Paul. But the Raptors are zigging while everybody else is zagging, and Masai Ujiri is making a pretty massive gamble that he's onto something that no other team in the NBA has figured out yet. I want to start off with a quote that I believe was actually said by Masai Ujiri himself. If the goal of an offense is to create space, then the goal of a defense is to take that space away. In a way, this is really the core principle of what the Raptors are doing. But it goes deeper than just putting out the tallest and lankiest guys on the court at all times. This idea also doesn't prioritize just height, otherwise they'd be throwing out a bunch of 7-footers at all times. It prioritizes what I'd call a skill to height ratio. The Raptors are willing to sacrifice height in favor of skill. Looking at their most used lineup this past season, consisting of Fred VanVleet, Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Scottie Barnes, and Pascal Siakam, there's not a single player in that lineup taller than Pascal Siakam, standing at 6'9". Inversely, Fred VanVleet is their starting point guard, standing at only 6'1". That lineup has an average height of 6'6", with an average wingspan of 6'11", coming out to an average wingspan to height ratio of 4.3. There seems to be this misconception that the Raptors are strictly putting out as much size on the floor as possible, regardless of skill, but that's just not the case. That's not what this new approach to building their roster is about. It's more about this idea of defensive positional versatility. It looks as though they want to be able to operate under a defensive game plan predicated on switching, with every player being relatively versatile on the defensive end, save for a guard or two. Is this a new concept? Not necessarily. The power of defensive versatility has been around for a long time now, and a lot of teams think about that when they're building their rosters. When you can get a bunch of forwards that can switch on defense and shoot threes, your overall ceiling on defense is going to be instantly raised. It just so happens that the Raptors have managed to acquire players that can both defend multiple positions and also shoot from the perimeter at a high level. Acquiring talent like that is a lot easier said than done. Let's narrow things down a little bit to just the guys on the Raptors that are 6'6" or taller and that also played at least 20 minutes per game last season. That leaves us with Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Scotty Barnes, Precious Achiuwa, and Chris Boucher. If you look at all of these guys, there's something that they have in common: defense. Every guy here was considered a good defender in college, or in the case of Gary Trent Jr. and Precious Achiuwa, showed that they could be good defenders prior to being acquired by the Raptors. In most cases for these guys, since joining the Raptors, their defensive statistical impact has either improved or more or less stayed around where it was. Another important thing to note here is how these guys looked as three-point shooters in college. In all cases except Gary Trent Jr., these guys really weren't the best perimeter shooters in college. But all of them looked to have improved massively since college, aside from Chris Boucher, whose three-point efficiency is down this year due to a weaker year in perimeter shooting, but he's typically been a great stretch big. This gives us a little bit of insight into the Raptors' approach to acquiring players. Prioritize defense and develop the perimeter shooting. They're not concerned about a player who isn't able to shoot threes because they're banking on their ability to turn them into solid three-point shooters. They want to get tall, mobile defenders and then add the skills on top of that. The offensive fit comes second to the defensive fit. This whole experiment is interesting at the very least, but is it actually working? We've got a bit of a sample size to work with to try and answer that question. The lineup of Gary Trent Jr., Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, Chris Boucher, and Precious Achiuwa played 103 possessions together last season. They had an offensive rating of 117.5 and a defensive rating of 99, giving this lineup a net rating of 18.4. But what makes this offense work? As far as perimeter shooting goes, this lineup isn't exactly loaded with snipers, with two sub 34% three-point shooters in Scottie Barnes and Chris Boucher. So how is a lineup of big men able to put up a nearly 118 offensive rating? A massive factor at play is the fact that this lineup generates an insane number of second chance opportunities due to having so many big bodies on the floor to crash the glass. This all-big lineup generated a massive 18.4 offensive rebounds per 36 minutes. Having that many extra opportunities simply means more opportunities to score, and with the height that this lineup inherently possesses, getting things like putbacks is relatively easy. This kind of stuff can help mitigate the lack of perimeter scoring that you'd otherwise have with a more traditional lineup. You may not be getting the points from beyond the arc, but you're making up for it with your second chance points, while also taking away possessions from your opposing team. And for what they lack in spacing on the perimeter, they make up for it in their interior gravity. This is what that looks like. You've got 6'9" Siakam passing it to 6'8" Achiuwa in the short roll, and he's going to draw defensive attention in the paint. Then you have 6'7" Scottie and 6'9" Boucher cut to the dunker spot to get a wide open shot since the defense already pulled up on Achiuwa. On this play, Trent Jr. drives, pulling 4 of Philly's defenders into the paint with him, giving him 2 options. He can either get it to Siakam in the dunker spot or kick it out to Boucher in the corner. He opts to pass it to Siakam for the open dunk. This is the kind of stuff that this lineup can do with the spacing that modern NBA analytics deems as a bad thing. But the reality is that perimeter shooting isn't the only way to create opportunities for your team. It's also worth noting that if Boucher returns to his 2020-21 three-point efficiency and Scottie Barnes progresses from his 30% three-point shooting rookie season, the spacing of a lineup like this really isn't even that bad. You can change it up too and throw in a guy like Anunoby and bolster that spacing while not giving up the size advantage on both offense and defense, or you can have a guy like Fred VanVleet orchestrate the offense while surrounding him with tall, skilled defenders. A lot of teams run these small ball lineups, which usually have traditional guards of average height at their positions with average size small and power forwards, and then a 6'8" or 6'9" center. The approach that the Raptors are taking seeks to counter those small ball lineups because it maintains that height advantage while also maintaining the defensive versatility that's needed to slow down opposing offense that are running smaller centers to try and put points on the board. As I mentioned earlier, this lineup holds teams to 99 points per 100 possessions. For some context, the best defensive rating in the league this year was 106.9 points per 100 possessions. Needless to say, these 5 guys aren't going to be playing all 48 minutes every single night, and Fred VanVleet and Malachi Flynn are still going to be integral parts of that Raptors game plan going forward. But look at a guy like Delano Banton, a 6'7" forward that got roughly 12 minutes a night and played in over 60 games this past season. He's another guy with a lot of size, yet he maintains athleticism and mobility, being extremely fast. And most importantly, he's still skilled. He can handle the ball, and although the efficiency isn't there yet, the Raptors are betting on being able to develop his efficiency while making use of his value as a rim pressurer and cutter. But Scotty Barnes is really the magic piece of the puzzle for the Raptors' gamble to pay off. His rookie season was certainly very good, but the question on every Raptors fan's mind is whether or not he's going to be just a very good player or if he's going to become that guy for the Raptors. Because if he does, the possibilities for this team are endless. They already experimented with him as a point forward a lot this past season, and it was pretty effective. The common rebuttal when people talk about Scottie Barnes' upside is often that he's just never going to be a good shot creator, and my response to that is simply, why not? He's only 21 years old, and the film shows that there's a lot of potential there at the NBA level for him to be capable of getting to his spots for good looks. The first thing that people bring up is the fact that he wasn't a great three-point shooter during his rookie season, which seems like an unfair criticism considering there are plenty of players who weren't good three-point shooters during their first years. And as a matter of fact, it's pretty common. Then they seem to ignore his mid-range ability entirely, something that he showed he was capable of leaning on to put points on the board on enough of a sample size that I really can't say that it was a fluke. The fact that he's able to create for himself in the mid-range is really promising for his upside as a scorer. Yes, perimeter shooting is going to be his swing skill and play a big role in determining whether or not he becomes around a 20 point per game scorer or if he becomes a prolific 3-level scoring threat. But my point is that he already has enough to be fine without it, assuming a normal development trajectory. The playmaking that he provides out of the forward position gives him another layer to his game that really sets him apart from his peers, and having a second aspect on offense makes me feel comfortable projecting him to have an all-star upside. He's going to be the key to unlocking this unorthodox approach. If he can operate as a primary ball handler out of the forward spot, dishing out 5+ assists per game and scoring effectively, while also providing solid to great defense, then Masai Ujiri just needs to put the right pieces around him to build a contender. If Masai's bet pays off and the Raptors are able to win a championship while making use of this approach, there's going to be a lot of front offices looking towards them as a blueprint and reevaluating the current approach to building a contender. If you guys enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. That's the #1 way to support me and help me continue making content. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.